We remember the Vikings as architects of chaos, masters of the longship and the axe, whose presence alone signaled destruction across Europe. Their sagas are filled with epic battles, honor in death, and the glory of the raid. But history, like an ancient church built upon darker foundations, sometimes hides the most profound human tragedy. What happened not on the battlefield, but in the ruins of the sanctuary when the smoke cleared and the last defender had fallen? The most profound suffering was often reserved for the silent witnesses, the nuns. The men who guarded the monasteries, the monks, the abbots, met their fate swiftly at the point of a sword. Their torment was brief, for the holy women who remained, dedicated servants of a peaceful God. A fate often unfolded that defied quick description, a nightmare where death itself became a desperate wish. The silence of the historical record surrounding these women is not a sign of their insignificance, but a chilling testament to the cruelty they endured. A darkness so profound that medieval chroniclers dared not commit it to ink, lest they invoke the wrath of the heavens or the shame of man. We must turn away from the romanticized sagas and look instead to the unforgiving earth. Archaeology provides the cold factual record where written history failed out of fear or embarrassment. From the excavated slave markets of Dublin to the mass graves of the Saxon heartland, the material culture of the Viking Age reveals a grim economic truth. The raid was not merely for gold and silver, but for human lives. The lives of captured nuns, stripped of their vows, dignity, and names, became currency in a vast, global trade network stretching from the British Isles to the eastern caliphates. Consider the fall of Clonmacnoise in 845 CE. The chroniclers documented the death of 43 monks, their defense heroic and their end tragic, but their account stops abruptly before addressing the cloister. What became of the women who lived there? Excavations at Woodquay in Dublin offer a terrifying answer. Iron shackles designed for slender wrists, ankle rings meant for small frames, and warehouse foundations built not for grain, but for the confinement of living inventory. These discoveries confirm that captured nuns held a specific, quantifiable economic value within the Viking system. Inscriptions from places like Schleswig further catalog this terrifying reality. Runes carved into wood and stone function as commercial receipts, detailing the price structure for human property. A high valuation for a young, strong nun, a slightly lower one for an older sister, and a discount if she bore the marks of resistance from the raid. These weren't accounts of savagery but ledgers of commerce. The transformation from a servant of God to a commodity was systematic, cold, and legally defined within the Viking social order. But even the dehumanizing reality of the slave market often represented a less agonizing fate. Deeper horrors emerge when we examine the soil itself. At sites near monasteries like Portmaro, sacked in 862, Irish annals again fall silent after listing the male casualties. Yet bog samples and soil analysis reveal mass burials of female bodies, many exhibiting the same systematic trauma. These women did not die in the heat of battle. They met a methodical end after surrender, often showing signs of prolonged, deliberate harm, a calculated extinguishing of life, not a consequence of war. The darkness of the Viking Age was often codified by law, transforming individual acts of abuse into institutionalized policy. Viking war culture dictated that a defeated man's dependents, including the nuns under his protection, became the legal property of the captor. Old Norse terminology defined this captured woman as konur, literally, owned woman, a biological resource essential for the continuity of the settlement. The Icelandic Gregos law codes explicitly detailed procedures for declaring ownership publicly before witnesses, rendering the woman's consent completely irrelevant. This legal framework meant that children born from these unions, conceived in violence and coercion, were technically considered legitimate under Norse law. The system was designed to transform conquest into lineage, replacing the culture of the vanquished with the bloodline of the victor. Yet even this twisted form of forced assimilation was sometimes superseded by a more ancient, darker tradition, ritual sacrifice. In 878, the great heathen army captured Red setting. The Anglo-Saxon chronicles focus on the military defeat, omitting any mention of the Holy Sisters in the abbey. However, the ground at former Viking campsites often reveals layers of destruction inconsistent with typical warfare. At the Saxon palace, iron oxide stains, traces of blood iron, were found in concentration beneath the stones, indicating not a spontaneous battle, but an organized, extensive series of killings. Furthermore, analysis of specific boat burials shows female skeletons interred with warriors, bearing marks of strangulation and chemical traces of hallucinogens, suggesting these women were ritually slain to accompany their masters into the afterlife, victims consumed by religious custom. The scale of this operation moved far beyond individual raids. It became an industry. By the late 9th century, the Great Army's winter encampments, such as the one at Thetford, were surrounded by midden heaps that tell a chilling story. Archaeologists uncovered infant remains, dozens of them, exhibiting signs of systematic trauma. These were the children of the assaults upon the nuns, offspring neither the Christian Church nor the Viking father wished to acknowledge or claim. Their deaths were calculated, ensuring no evidence of the forced union survived to challenge the legal or spiritual order. The international aspect of this suffering is crucial. Arabic sources from the 9th century describe Viking slave caravans stretching for thousands of miles. The Celtic and Germanic nuns were highly prized in the Eastern markets, often fetching premium rates as exotic symbols of status and luxury for foreign buyers. Ship manifests, carved in runes, listed human cargo alongside furs and amber, demonstrating a chilling standardization. 20 nuns per vessel was a typical shipment along the Dnieper River, marking a 1,000-mile descent into servitude, but the utmost extreme of calculated human cruelty was discovered in Dublin after Irish forces temporarily retook the city in 914. Just beyond the city walls, archaeologists uncovered execution pits, stone-lined holes designed not for quick death but for prolonged agony. Inside, skeletons showed evidence of deliberate, non-lethal trauma, legs broken to prevent escape, arms shattered to stop self-harm. The victims perished slowly, confined in a crouched position for days or weeks, dying from thirst, exposure, or starvation. This method of calculated, slow burial was rooted in Viking law for slaves who resisted or struck their masters. The pit was deep enough to deny escape, yet shallow enough to prolong the suffering, creating a spectacle for those still alive. It was a terrifying message etched into the earth. Obedience was the only alternative to a drawn-out, agonizing end. The cruelty was not a consequence of chaos, but an engineered tool of psychological control. When the Viking Age eventually drew to a close, the infrastructure of this trade did not disappear. It was inherited. Christian kingdoms, having defeated the Norse, often repurposed the very slave networks they had fought against. Monastic records in subsequent centuries list vast numbers of indentured servants, a rebranded name for the thousands of women and children who remained trapped in servitude, their chains merely exchanging Viking captors for Christian masters. The system of institutionalized abuse survived the fall of the empire, woven into the fabric of the new order. Genetic research today provides the final, undeniable evidence that chroniclers attempted to silence. Isotope studies reveal patterns of population mixing directly tracing the known Viking slave routes. The Celtic and Saxon female mitochondrial DNA found in modern Scandinavian populations is not the result of peaceful migration, but the stark biological legacy of forced reproduction. Every percentage point represents hundreds of monasteries stormed, thousands of nuns taken, and generations of forced births that built an empire of bloodlines. The darkness of this history lies not just in the violence of the moment, but in the calculated system that sustained it, an economic model built upon the absolute destruction of human dignity, sanctified by law and often ignored by convenience. The forgotten suffering of the nuns, who were treated as property, currency, and ritual objects, serves as a devastating reminder that even within systems of profound historical transformation, the moral cost is often borne silently by the most vulnerable. Their defiance in death or survival remains the single truth the sagas could never fully erase. If you found this story thought-provoking, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more historical insights like this one.